President Trump is beginning to crack down on excessive government spending. This is something that just about every president has promised, but the vast majority of them don't do anything about it when they're actually elected. Trump is taking a first step. You probably don't know this, but federal employees get automatic pay rises. Automatic meaning they don't have to do anything special for it, they don't have to excel in their jobs, they just have to show up. And that's it. It doesn't really happen so much in the private sector because it's not something that's sustainable. Trump wants to put a stop to this, so he sent a letter to the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, expressing that he has the authority to do this and that they're going to stop. These excessive, pointless pay rises are going to stop. He said, quote, "Federal employee pay must be performance-based and aligned strategically toward recruiting, retaining, and rewarding high-performing federal employees and those with critical skill sets," unquote. So in other words, he wants the government to be run like it was a company. Like, it actually makes sense for the first time. See, it used to be that when you got a government job, there was a trade-off. You were getting the government job because it was stable, because you pretty much can't be fired. You have to do something really excessive to get fired. But it was at the expense of low pay, or relatively low pay, lower than you'd get in the private sector. That's no longer the case. Now, in a lot of cases, federal employees get paid more than their counterparts in the private sector, and yet they also still have the stability. They still pretty much never get fired. And so that's not a sustainable model, to not fire people and then give them pay increases and pay them more than you would in a private company. There's no wonder that the nation is in debt. And this is not just a small group of people. The federal government is the nation's biggest single employer. It employs over 2 million people. And, you might think about companies like Walmart and stuff, they only hire like 1.2 million. 2 million people doesn't even include like the army, military, these are civilian employees, doesn't count the postal service. The government is ever expanding. If you had ever looked at one of these long lists of every federal agency, you just wanted to strike them out. You look and you see stuff like the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Like what is that? It's actually another one of these agencies that takes taxpayer money and sends it off to different countries around the world. Another one of those. There are lots of those, by the way. But, in a private company, it's supposed to be that better people get rewarded for what they do. People who are better at their jobs get rewarded. And those who are just kind of parasitic and who don't try to succeed, don't try to excel, they don't get rewarded. But in the government, you're creating this climate to where everyone is rewarded the same. It's like a socialist, type system. So that needs to change. And we're starting on the road to that thanks to President Trump, but he's being attacked for that in the media, of course. The media is also now attacking conservatives for an incredible reason. It's attacking conservatives for attacking the Pope, as they put it. You see, you may not have heard, but one of the Pope's underlings was a pedophile, and the Pope knew about it. The Pope knew about it for years, and didn't say anything, didn't do anything, didn't fire him, didn't move him away from his position with children. So, conservatives have been, casting criticism, seeking to change this. How evil. Seriously, the media is attacking conservatives for, as they put it, trying to reform the Vatican. Like that's a bad thing when we're talking about pedophilia. So, I've given this some thought because I wondered, what sort of person do you have to be to think the way they do? But the Pope is their kind of moral leader. The left and the media, he's their kind of moral arbiter when you really think about it. See, this is a fairly new Pope, but whilst he's been in the position of power, if you will, he has told different countries to accept Muslim refugees with disregard to the welfare of the Christians that are within those nations, to allow gay clergymen. In fact, it's now been revealed that the Vatican apparently has its own gay lobby. Seriously, The Pope was quoted as saying, and I will quote this, "The principle of the centrality of the human person obliges us to always prioritize personal safety over national security," unquote. National security is personal safety. It is the personal safety of the Christians who founded a certain nation. I mean, it is the Pope's job to not only push a Christian message. I know Catholics often don't like to be called Christians, but we follow the same book. It is the Pope's job to promote this Christian message, but also to protect Christians, to speak for Christians, where they're being slaughtered, for example. And of course, Christians are persecuted throughout the world, the main group that is persecuted around the world. But instead, he's like, well, welcome all these Muslims into your countries, even though they attack your people, en masse migrants. And of course, the Muslims have their own problem with pedophilia, interestingly enough, which is because their main prophet, Muhammad, had his own 6-year-old bride, who he consummated the marriage with at 9. So it's no wonder that they have a pedophilia problem. Yeah. Now, a cardinal. Remember, a cardinal is someone who is actually appointed by the Pope himself. Well, he spoke out about, the priorities of the Vatican. And I want you to watch this because I couldn't put it better myself. Here, just take a look, all right?
Pope has a bigger agenda. He's got to get on with other things of talking about the environment and protecting migrants.
So that was Cardinal Blaise Supich, appointed by the Pope, and who says that the environment and migrants are more important than the pedophiles in their own ranks. It's kind of hard to put into words just how disturbing that is. This same cardinal, by the way, also happened to claim that the critics of this Pope, well, they're just racists. Because this Pope is Latino, he said. It's like this particular cardinal could stand for office as a Democrat. It's crazy. He uses exactly the same arguments. But, yeah, this Latino Pope, by the way, just before I go on, he was born in Argentina to Italian parents. Yeah, facts don't matter. Just look the other way. Instead, you have to call the opponent racist because they're winning the argument against you. That's like the leftist motto now. These people in the Vatican would be like right at home. This is what I'm saying with how the media likes the Pope and the Vatican. They'd all be right at home together in like Hollywood, for example, or at a fundraiser with the Clintons. Maybe a James Gunn style pedo party. Did you hear about that? That was when James Gunn liked to dress up at this party where some of the people were priests and some of them were looking like young girls and boys. Yeah, because that is so twisted. But seriously, now one of the reasons why the Vatican is the way that it is, why you have rampant pedophilia, is because of their own policies. They require that, the clergymen do not, have heterosexual normal relations. Don't get married, for example. And this isn't something that's in doctrine. This is not something that you'll find in the Bible. In fact, you'll find the opposite in the first book of Timothy. You'll find a commandment, essentially, that says that they should, in fact, have a bride, have a wife. But the Catholic Church has kind of gone back and forth for like over 1,000 years on this topic. But what happens then when you say that they only accept men who do not have wives is you get men who don't have an interest in wives. So you get men who are homosexuals and who are pedophiles, because that's what's left. This situation could be changed drastically if they were to change their policies to, allow for marriage, to allow for normal men, and to also get rid of homosexuality as much as they can in the clergy, because you've got men who are hanging out with young little boys, and that just makes sense. But they won't. And they make it sound like it's some kind of doctrine, but it's a false doctrine because it's not actually biblical at all. The first century Peter, who was the first pope, he was married. Most of the apostles who were chosen by Christ were married men. Okay. I have another topic I need to talk to you about. Do you remember when leftists were sane and they wanted all of the races to be treated equally? You were supposed to look at a person, this was the ideal, you would look at a person and you would judge him by his accomplishments, by his character, but you wouldn't judge him by his race. You would do everything that you could to ignore that. It was called race blindness or color blindness. It was held as the ideal. Not anymore. It turns out that is a form of racism in itself. In fact, the ACLU is defending Harvard University because Harvard University is apparently discriminating against Asian students, with their affirmative action-like policy. The ACLU, they issued a statement that you have to hear. Here it goes. Quote, "The Trump administration has advocated for race-blind policies, which Harvard and virtually all other universities have found are demonstrably insufficient to achieve meaningful diversity, given the reality of historic and continuing racial discrimination in this country." Unquote. So, essentially, Trump favors race blindness, as they put it, and so they're going to be against it. They're going to fix a history of racial discrimination by being racist now. This is modern leftist dogma. I don't know how they can even run now when, with their bizarre policies of raising taxes and being racist to fix racism and so on. But listen to it, okay? They don't want to help Asians because they're already smart. That's literally what they're saying. What does that say about their assumptions of the people they're allegedly trying to help? What does that say about their assumptions of black people? I mean, if you don't want to help the Asians because they're smart, hello. There's this clear racial dynamic here that they just don't want people to look at. It's about promoting people that they think couldn't make it on their own merits, and that's kind of disturbing. But moreover, these affirmative action policies, there are a lot of people like classical liberals, Dennis Prager is one that springs to mind, who said that he would support these policies that try and help, for instance, poor black people, if they were helpful. If they really did help them to succeed, he would be in favor of it. But they don't. And so he's not. And what I mean by that is, what you end up having is a system where you take someone who could not normally, compete in a certain class, and because of his race, you say, well, come on, join this class anyway. And then he joins the class, he's not able to compete properly, and he drops out with, $30,000 in debt. And that's not helpful. The Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, I think, pretty much summed this up, and he said, quote, "The law school tantalizes unprepared students with the promise of a University of Michigan degree and all the opportunities that it offers. These overmatched students take the bait, only to find that they cannot succeed in the cauldron of competition, and this mismatch crisis is not restricted to elite institutions." Unquote. I don't think Clarence Thomas is being racist. He's saying that, what I just said, that you've got this system that's actually hurting these people. It's hurting those who would normally struggle to compete by letting them compete, forcing them in a position where they're going to fail and they're going to have debt. And by the way, this is like a perpetual slavery thing. Because, you're institutionalizing their poverty. If you force someone into a position of debt because they can't compete in a certain class, and maybe they could have in a different class or in a different school, if you force them into that position, you force them into debt, you force them into a lifetime of poverty. And there's also a connection between how successful a family is, and intelligence. And you have this situation where if you've got like a poor family, right? Poor parents, you'll probably have children who stay poor. And that's because they teach their kids the wrong messages. If you stay chronically poor in the United States of America, in what is very much a land of opportunity, then you're doing something wrong, right? I mean, you're not good at managing your money. I don't think this is particularly controversial. And you teach your kids to do the same bad things that you're doing. Or you don't teach them anything, and then the public schools teach them. And the public schools teach kids to work in factories. They don't teach them to strive to succeed. Instead, they just teach them to just kind of, work 9 to 5 and never really reach their full potential. That's what parents do, when they do it well. It kind of reminds me of the situation with the lottery. When you hear about these poor people who win the lottery and they get like $1 million or something, and then the press finds them several years later, maybe 5 years later, and they're poor again. Probably as poor as they were before they won the lottery. And it's because if you don't know how to manage money well, it doesn't matter how much you have, you'll just lose it. The poor person, given the $1 million, is far more likely to spend it on expensive cars or several month-long vacations than the person who's already, fairly wealthy or has his own business, who's more likely to invest it or even just save it. And this is the problem that we have. But people like me are called racist. They're labeled racist by people like the ACLU, ironically, for trying to create an environment where these people can succeed. If you want the poor black kid, for example, to really succeed, where they're not right now, the answer is not putting them into college courses that they're not quite capable of doing, in some cases. The answer is teaching them what their parents haven't, in order to actual good lessons about, making sure that your income is more than what you're spending out if you're, starting a new business and so on. These, what seem like basic lessons that so many have not been taught. But that's not what we're doing. And that really should be fixed. That there are better ways that don't just teach these kids to be dependent upon the system. And that's what it's about. It's like this new system of slavery. Alright, well, that's all I have for now. If you enjoyed this show, please like it and share it with your friends. There's only so much I can do to get the word out. I really need you guys to help. Thank you. Also, you can subscribe, and there's a bell that you should hit if you do subscribe on YouTube. I also have a link in the description below that provides you with better ways to subscribe more reliably to get notified of new videos. There's also another link that you can hit if you'd like to help support me in my doing these videos on a regular basis. Those who've already supported me, I thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Health-wise.